All right, folks, welcome to the weekly roundtable. We're going to go through the normal setup and configuration, so bear with us for a moment. This takes a couple of moments, and then we're going to bring our guests, Stephanie Thomas and Sean Scanlon, on and have a conversation with them about the upcoming election and the offices they're running for. And Ronnie, while you're doing that, I'm just texting a couple of folks to make sure this gets shared as well.
Okay.
So you keep doing your thing.
Facebook's behaving very slowly for me this morning.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too.
All right, it's being shared, John. I think we're good to go and bring everybody back up.
Okay. All right. I got to do a couple things because I got everything out already here. So bear with me. And okay, we are live. All right. Welcome to the WeHod.com Roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by the managing editor of WeHod.com, Ronni Newton. Ronni, how are you?
Good morning. I'm good. Thank you.
Well, welcome. We're being broadcast on WeHod.com, regionally on WHCI TV, Channel 5, and statewide on Connecticut News Junkie, as well as several other well-populated streaming sites. We are in the thick of a midterm elections season today, and we welcome two of our statewide candidates for office, Sean Scanlon, who's running for Comptroller, and Stephanie Thomas, who's running for Secretary of the State. Both are currently elected representatives, Mr. Scanlon for the 98th District and Ms. Thomas for the 148th District, both state reps.
143rd.
Welcome to the show, Stephanie and Sean.
Good to be here.
We're happy to have you. I do need to mention at this point, we have extended an invitation to the Connecticut Republicans to appear on the show for their own segment, but to date, we've not heard back and nothing has been booked. So I just want to make sure that's on the record, as they say. So, all right. So, Stephanie, let's start with you. Why are you running? Why are you running for statewide office? What inspired you to do that?
Running for statewide office it's not my interest, but running for Secretary of the State is. When Denise announced she was retiring, I thought it was actually a perfect fit for my experiences and my interests. I'm a small business owner, so I care a lot about the business services side of the job. But I also, I vice chair our elections committee in the legislature. And for many years, I've been interested in civic engagement and civic education. So I really saw an opportunity for the secretary to be much more proactive in that area. So I decided to run for the job.
And we're gonna talk a lot about business services. We're gonna talk about roles and responsibilities. But Sean, same question for you. Talk about your desire. You know, both of you as state reps now stepping up and running for larger office. Sean, talk about your thoughts and your thought process on that.
Well, similar to Stephanie, for me, it was about the policies, right? So in the legislature, I've had the honor in the last 8 years of chairing both the insurance committee and now the finance committee. And those two committees work a lot with the comptroller's office because the comptroller is our chief financial officer here in Connecticut, but he's really also, or he or she really is also the chief healthcare officer in the state, where they're literally running the single largest employer-sponsored healthcare plan in the entire state, about 250,000 lives. So the issues that I care the most about are the issues that the comptroller's office deals with. I was very good friends with Kevin Lembo, who was our comptroller for 10 years. And when he decided to resign somewhat suddenly in December of 2021 due to a health condition, I decided to step up and run for the job. And I'm really excited that we're 29 days away from the election and hopefully able to get to work and get some stuff done.
In the preamble before we went live, I think it was Stephanie mentioned it was still 29 days. And I sat here and I said, isn't it like 2 weeks away? But it's not. It just seems to be a never ending election cycle for these midterms, because I think it's all anybody has talked about all year long. So I'll be happy. I'll be happy when these 29 days. I'm sure you guys will be really happy when these 29 days get by. So, all right. So Sean,
I'll be happy for the advertising to stop.
I'm sorry, Ronnie.
I said I'll be happy when the advertising ends.
Yeah, it's at first it was interesting. You know, you turn on CNN, you turn on some of the big networks, and you see local Connecticut folks that you know or you've met in these commercials. It's exciting, but I agree with you, Ronnie. I'm looking forward to that. But you know, it's helping the economy. All this money being spent, right? So
yeah, that's true.
All right, so Sean, you touched on it, but I'm going to drill down a little bit. It's a COO of the state, but you know, I've seen you at several public events now. You kid around at public events about, you know, what does the comptroller actually do? Can we drill down? I'm going to ask you to hit it two ways. Number one, let's assume Governor Lamont wins re-election, but what happens if Bob Stefanowski wins and is elected the next governor? Does that change your role at all? Talk a little bit about that.
It doesn't, because one of the things that's really important for the comptroller is independence. And you really have to be the chief fiscal watchdog of the state, whether your team is in power or the other team is in power. And I think one of the things I learned very closely from working with Kevin was he was truly independent. There were a few things that Malloy did that he publicly stood up and said that he was against. He voted against things on the bond commission. He publicly expressed his position when he thought that they were unclear. There were things that he very clearly disagreed with Governor Lamont on, including the public option, something that I worked very closely with Kevin on. And so I think whether Bob wins or Ned wins, I'm going to be the same comptroller that I'm telling people I'm going to be, which is somebody who calls balls and strikes, calls it like I see it, is always honest, and let the numbers dictate what I do, not the politics.
So what happens when there is a disagreement in policy with the governor, whether it be a Democrat or whether it be somebody else? Who's the final arbiter of that? Does the state legislature get involved? What happens?
Well, this is kind of funny because in 1990, a guy by the name of Bill Curry was sort of seen as the person who revolutionized the comptroller's office and made it as relevant as it is today. And that's because he went to war with Lowell Weicker, who was the independent governor of the time. And he was basically saying that Lowell's numbers were not right. And Lowell reacted by cutting the comptroller's budget and changing the comptroller's statutory powers in the next legislative session, because he did not want this person sort of chirping at him and sort of trying to be, the honest arbiter of what was going on. That is the role of the job. And those statutes were since changed back. But the whole point is that you are a duly elected constitutional officer. Am I running on the governor's ticket right now? You bet I am. Do I like the governor and think he's doing a great job? Absolutely. But if there are things that I believe in the interest of the taxpayers that I have to disagree with the governor on, I'm going to do it. And he knows that. And I believe I have the relationship with him right now that, we're going to do that in a respectful way. I don't think he's going to be trying to change the powers of the office, hopefully. But I think it's important that you have the difference there. And that's true for Stephanie and all of us, right? We're on his ticket, but we are duly elected officers. And there are 6 of us together. We each have 6 very different jobs. And we do them as our own people, not as one body.
One thing I'd love to hear a little bit more about is exactly how the comptroller's role and the budget director's role and the state treasurer's role kind of intersect and how they're different as well. I think maybe some people are a little bit confused about that.
Yeah, so basically the best way to think about it, treasurer is really just about investing the money from the pension fund and getting us the best rate of return possible when it comes to that fund. The comptroller is doing pretty much everything else. So we are paying the state's bills. We are paying the state's employees. We are overseeing all the benefit negotiation for healthcare, dental care, life insurance, all those things. And then doing a lot of the IT functions of the state. Government transparency. You can now look up every single person's salary on a website right now called Open Payroll. You can look at every single state expenditure. Kevin did a great job doing that. So there's a lot going on in the comptroller's office that most people don't realize. But I'll tell you the biggest interaction that the comptroller and the governor's budget secretary have is that every month on the first of the month, the comptroller writes a letter. Now, I want to revamp this process because I think it's a very antiquated, boring process where we write a 6-page letter in dense economic language about the state of the budget.
I get that letter.
I'm going to put out a video on the first of the month with a 60-second clock at the top of it and explain that letter in 60 seconds every month. But what can happen is if the governor and OPM disagree with the comptroller's findings, there's then this long, complicated process that has not happened in a very long time that goes on to try to get to the bottom of it. It involves the legislature having a role to sort of be the arbiter in it. But at the end of the day, I think it's about working collaboratively. And just for me, what's exciting is everyone knows what Stephanie does. Trying to explain what the comptroller does is something that does actually excite me. And I look forward to doing that more if I have the chance to be elected to it, to try to make the comptroller's office more accessible to the people of Connecticut.
So perfect time to pivot to you, Stephanie. Everyone knows what the Secretary of the State, we'll say this right, I think I read it wrong in the introduction, role is. Talk to us about what you see as the roles, what the roles and responsibilities are, how you would work with Sean if he's elected, how you work with Governor Lamont assuming he wins re-election.
I was going to say, does everyone know what the secretary does? I actually don't find that to be true. I often ask people, raise your hand if you know what the job entails, and I get 2 or 3 hands. The election side has certainly received a lot of attention over the last couple of years, so people correctly assume that we have something to do with elections. But many people, for example, think registrars of voters work for the secretary. Not true. So we are the body who ensures that election laws are being administered and that we certify election results. But then we have the business service side of the job. So if you are creating an LLC, for example, or filing your annual report or your commercial recording division, all of those things fall within the secretary's purview, as well as some tracking around all that paperwork that they're passing over there in the General Assembly, and things like notary publics and justices of the peace. And there's a lot of administration. And it is receiving a lot more attention, but I always remind people that at the end of it, it's not about politics. It's a lot about process and efficiency in government, and also transparency in government. And I just want to take a moment to mention one thing Sean mentioned, and I think Kevin was so outstanding with his commitment to open data and transparency. And I share that same commitment. And the Secretary's office has been rolling out page after page over the last few years under Denise Merrill, the same type of transparency on the election side. And I hope to continue that as well. And please tell me, was there a second part to your question?
It was a multi-part, but it was effectively about working with Sean, which you really touched on, working with Sean, working with the governor, or having to work with, if a couple of you win, a couple of you don't win, and you've got a mix of party affiliations throughout these offices.
I could really say ditto to what Sean said. I'm certainly running on the governor's team. I think we have a great ticket all around. But at the end of the day, the voters are electing each of us separately. And if duly elected, I will be implementing all the great programs, policies, platforms that I've put forth since December when I got into the race. And but I look forward to whoever wins what office, I can work with everybody. And this position, it's really important that it is not political, and that it is not bipartisan, but nonpartisan. Everybody has to have trust in our elections and also our business services. People come from all stripes. So I have always had an open door and believe in two-way communication, and that won't change.
Okay, so you've mentioned it twice. I'm going to apologize to the audience in advance because we're going to bounce around a little bit. But Stephanie, I know you want to talk about business services, so let's drill down on that. Explain to us what that means to you, because it obviously means a lot. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I like to talk about it because elections have become such a focal point. It's actually the smaller side when it comes to staffing of the secretary's office. I'm a small business owner myself. prior to opening my business. I ran a business for 19, 20 years. And so for me, I know when I started my business, it was so hard. Anyone who's founded their own company knows, you give blood, sweat, and tears. You're working sometimes 22 hours a day. You're, not sleeping, not eating. And when I got to the legislature, I discovered that there were at times many programs, special grant dollars, special trainings, opportunities out there that I realized that I, as a business owner, would have never had the time to find, because even knowing it's there, it takes about 10 Google searches to figure out, and 3 different agencies to track everything down. So I think the secretary has an opportunity to be much more proactive, because we have all this data. So we know which businesses are minority owned, veteran owned, woman owned. We know what industries they're in. So I would like to be more proactive about getting information about those programs and resources into the hands of the business owners. And I also would like to take some time to help various industries by bringing them together and convening groups, hopefully a couple of times a year, so that we, as I think our business owners are really the lifeblood of our economy. And if we can help them all do better, it helps the entire state.
I love that. And Ronnie, I'm not gonna mention names, but Ronnie and I we're chatting, I think, on Friday about somebody who has a small business here in town who's, it's kind of a fledgling business, and how this person, could possibly pursue these types of programs. Ronnie mentioned that, and I said, geez, I didn't even know these programs existed. So I love hearing that, you're looking for ways to bring these programs into the fore. Ronnie and I are both small business owners or small business partners or small business investors, both of us. And it's nice to know, because, it's tough. It's blood, sweat, and tears, like you said. So
yeah, well, WeHod.com is an LLC, and we're owned by 4 people, and we are 8 years old now, but a small, pretty new business.
4 very, very, very committed people. I mean, the work I see these people put into WeHod, especially Ronnie, but that's a conversation for another day. So, all right. So now I warn the audience, we're going to jump around. Here we are. Stephanie, I'm going to stick with you. I lived in Wilton for 10 years. When my wife and I first got married, we moved to Wilton. It was known. I had the blissful. I could be blissfully ignorant. I hopped on the 6:05 train out of Wilton every day. I didn't get home till 8 o'clock at night. I was unaware of a lot of what my wife had to experience as a Jewish woman, but Wilton was known as predominantly white, very Christian, very conservative, dry town, dry community. I won't go any further because my wife will yell at me. But can you tell us a little bit what it was like? I've heard you tell the story, and I love the story. Knocking on that first door in Wilton, what it was like for you, what you experienced in Wilton.
So I represent Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport, 3 diverse communities, like all communities are. So when I started door knocking in Wilton, I was a little afraid for many reasons, but mainly because it is seen as very Republican. And to win my state rep race, I knew I had to go to a lot of doors that perhaps many Democrats don't go to. But so I never knew what I might be getting on the other side of the door. But I remember, I think the story you're talking about in 2018, I went to a door and I said, "Hi, I'm Democrat Stephanie Thomas, blah, blah, blah." And the homeowner sort of looks at me, and then she beckons me close and she says, "I'm a Democrat, but don't tell my neighbors, they don't know." And I just thought it was hilarious, or maybe not, that she felt she had to hide her party affiliation. But I tell that story because I was elected in Wilton. I won Wilton when I won my election in 2020. And it's a sign to me that it is a much more open community than it was even in 2018, and that bringing conversations to the forefront has allowed an openness and I think a vitality to the community that perhaps wasn't there before. So I think everyone feels like they can say what's important to them, and other people will listen, and everyone feels like they have found part of their tribe. So I'm happy to have played a small role in that.
I'm happy you did too. And in fairness to Wilton, my wife and I moved out in 2004. That was a long time ago. So
It's a great town.
a lot can change in 2 decades, and it really is a wonderful community, and it certainly has changed over the years. So, Sean, not to ignore you, let's talk a little bit. I'm fascinated by what you do now, and obviously you'd have to give that up if elected. But talk about your role at New Haven Tweed as the executive director of the airport.
Yeah, well, in West Hartford, most people are probably Bradley people, and that's okay. Bradley is always going to be Connecticut's flagship airport. But where I live, down on the coast, we have been underserved by airports for a long, long time. Most of the folks that live down by me, they actually don't go to Bradley. They go to New York. And New York is a lot of traffic and hours away, and not a really fun experience for too many people. So back in 2019, I took on a job that everyone I know told me not to take, which was to be the executive director of Tweed Airport. It had been mired in controversy for decades. There was really not a lot happening. And when I started there, John, we had about 15 employees. We had one flight every day to Philadelphia on a 76 passenger jet, and really no ability to move forward. We were overly subsidized by the state and the city. We cost about $4 million a year to run the airport, and we were only making about $1 million of revenue. So you can do the math. That means that we had to make up $3 million somehow. Flash forward to today, we've now turned it around quite a bit. We have had a new air service come in, which is a Velo. They now fly every single day to 14 cities nonstop.
My wife and kids have all flown it numerous times.
Yeah, well, that's great. And the thing I'm most proud of, though, is that the year I started, we had about 80,000 people come in and out of our airport. Just this last week, about a month shy of 1 year of service, we've had 500,000 people. So
wow.
Obviously, to have 420,000 more people come through the business is a testament to the fact that, number one, we knew that if we built it, they would come. And number two, the response from the community down here has been incredible. And we have now created 200 plus new jobs, brought in all those new passengers, brought in all this new service. And I think at the end of the day, it's a great thing for not just Southern Connecticut, but all of Connecticut to have two viable airports that give people choices. Like I said, Bradley will always be bigger than us. We have no absolute ambition to get as big as them, nor could we. It's all about offering choices to consumers, and I think that that's what we're doing.
Well, I think some of the low-cost airlines have really made it attractive even for people from West Hartford and this area to, it's not that much farther. So
sure.
And let me tell you, and I think about the cascading effects of this growth. I mean, I think of the restaurants in the airport, food services in the airport, parking, other services, other retail. I mean, there's so many opportunities. It's really exciting to hear. And I can speak firsthand. I mean, parking down there is easy. It's inexpensive. And, you hop on your Velo 737 in 2.5 hours, you're in Fort Myers. So anyway, pretty exciting. So, all right. So about the airport. So you mentioned some challenges. You've recently, I think if I understand it correctly, you've gotten approval for this runway extension, but East Haven's pretty angry about it, which I'm surprised. Now I'm a weather nerd. So planes predominantly take off to the north and to the west, which means East Haven wouldn't be hearing this. But anyway, maybe it's on throttle up on the runway, but talk about the process of getting that runway extended. How is that coming, and how does that help prepare you for the next step?
Well, whether it's trying to pass a bill or trying to build an airport, things are hard, right? Nothing is easy that is worth doing. And we have some challenges. And, I'm doing what I can to work with East Haven in the remaining time that I have, just like I've been doing with them for 1.5 years. And I'm confident that at the end of the day, we can get this in a good place. By and large, most people actually do support the airport. There is a small but very vocal group of people who are very passionate about trying to express their concerns. And that's great. That's what this is all about. And I meet with them almost every day and talk to them. And, have given out my cell phone number publicly. And so we have a lot of those conversations. What I would take to this job is I run an airport that has over 200 employees every day. Hundreds of thousands of people that pass through it. It's a business. And we have successfully gotten that business out of government. And this sounds weird as a Democrat to talk about this, but it was at a point where we had no choice but to try to seek a public-private partnership because we literally couldn't rely on the state or the town anymore to subsidize the airport. And so we learned to figure out ways to combine the best of government and the best of the private sector and get the best outcome for people. You can't always do that in government. It's not always possible to do that. But the comptroller has to do that all the time because, for example, if you're in charge of negotiating healthcare benefits for 250,000 people, you have to do that with the private sector. We're not self-insuring 250,000 people. We're doing that with a private insurance company. And so my time as the executive of this airport, my time in the legislature, I think has prepared me to step into this job on day one and do what the comptroller does, is work with business, work with government, and get the best outcomes for people. And that's what I'll do as comptroller.
So are there any creative ideas that you might have to deal with the unfunded pension liabilities? Because, that's talked about as one of the major hurdles that the state will continue to face for many, many years to come. I know the town of West Hartford came up with a very creative approach by turning those into pension obligation bonds. Is that something that you think the state might be able to look at?
Well, the best news for me is that the creative idea already existed. And that's because my predecessor, Kevin Lembo, who, as I've said multiple times on this call, is a great friend to me and I think did a great job. He, in 2017, worked with the legislature to pass this thing called the volatility cap. And before I put people to sleep talking about the volatility cap, it's actually exciting. So let hang with me for a second. So basically, the problem in Connecticut for years and years and years, I'll try to explain this as fast as possible so we can get back to Stephanie too, was that we were so dependent on Stephanie's neck of the woods, right? People who lived in Fairfield County who worked on Wall Street. And our income tax collection was therefore very volatile because when people did well on Wall Street, the tax coffers were boosted. When people did not do well on Wall Street, because these people file quarterly, we would have this big downturn. And Kevin's idea was that we should create a volatility cap so that when things are going really, really well, we can't just spend all that money or allocate all that money to doing what we have to do in that moment. We're going to save some of that money so that when things go down, we don't have these boomer budget bust cycles. And that was really what was hurting us during the Malloy years, was that we would have one report saying that things were going good. They would balance the budget because they thought that that's what they needed to do. And then the next thing you know, the market takes a dip and the budget is completely busted. And then you have to raise taxes, you have to cut spending, or most of the time you have to do both those things. We've enacted this volatility cap, and what that has resulted in is not just a $3.3 billion rainy day fund that we've never had before. It's not just having a balanced budget where we don't have to raise taxes, but it has made us disciplined when it comes to our finances, to the tune of the fact that now, because of the volatility cap, we have paid off $5.8 billion of that debt in the last 18 months. That's 15% of our overall unfunded liability just in the last 15 months. And that is crazy, Ronni, when you think about the fact that from 1939, reinstituted the pension, to 1974, they set aside $0 for our pension fund. And between 74 and 2010, when Malloy came in, they set aside very little. Since 2010, we've been disciplined to at least pay what we owe every year, but that is still a big millstone around our neck. If we stay disciplined and we stay funding that through the volatility cap, it's going to take us about 10 more years, but we will rid ourselves of that legacy debt. And my children and your children will not have to deal with this in the way that we are now having to deal with it had we not had to done that proposal.
Good way of explaining it quickly.
I wasn't bored at all, Sean.
I
promise. No, that was really terrific, and I think that's really important because that is in no way being relayed in opposition ads. And obviously, they want to get elected; they're not going to relay that. And I'm glad you took that opportunity to.
Well, and again, I know you're inviting them on, and I hope they come on to sort of talk about what they want to do. But in some weird way, the Democratic Party has become the party of fiscal responsibility and paying down our debt, actually balancing these budgets and doing tax cuts within reason. The other side is looking to drain that rainy day fund, change the savings that we're doing, pay down less of our debt, and cut more taxes in this moment. And I and the governor and most of our colleagues in the legislature just don't think that that's the right idea, because that's exactly why we got in this mess in the first place. Democrats and Republicans were very short-sighted. They were thinking, as politicians often do, about the next election or the next moment, and they weren't thinking about the long term. And that's why we have $45 billion of unfunded legacy pension debt. Now we are in the process of actually fixing that. And I'm confident that the voters of Connecticut, while it's hard to explain to people quickly, when you do explain it, they want us to get rid of this debt and move forward in a responsible way.
I mean, I feel it would transform the state, having that liability gone. Certainly make the state a lot more attractive for business, for anybody. So, all right. Question for both of you. Stephanie, you go first. What would you call your greatest legislative accomplishment as a state representative?
Oh, good question. For me, undoubtedly, it's in sync with why I'm running for secretary. I have been a big proponent of getting the constitutional amendments on the ballot to allow Connecticut to adopt early voting, which was successful and will appear on the ballot this year. As most people know, Connecticut is one of only 4 states in the entire country, and also the U.S. territories, who don't have some form of in-person early voting. So it would be great to bring us into this century, this decade, and have that common sense reform. And I certainly, I also had introduced a bill along with many of my colleagues related to automatic voter registration, which also passed. I think anything we can do to make it easy for people, whether they're turning 18 or enrolling in college or interacting with the Department of Labor, et cetera, to have the opportunity to register easily like they do at the DMV. But I would like to make sure there are no glitches to the system like we've seen with DMV, where if you're not paying very careful attention, it might switch your party affiliation to unaffiliated. So I think once we clear up that glitch, it can be a great reform. So those are 2 things I'm really proud of.
So for folks who are running around, you're seeing a lot of lawn signs right now, and there's a set of lawn signs that say "Vote Yes."
Yeah.
This is what Stephanie is talking about, and we've already voted for this once. It has to appear on the ballot twice to be a constitutional change.
And if I can just clarify, the legislature has voted for it twice. Right. So the voters are getting.
I'm sorry. Yes. Sorry about that. Thank you for that. I made it seem like we, the voters. Sorry.
Yeah. No, so it's going to the voters, and it went to the voters in 2014 in conjunction with no excuse absentee voting. But there was no education campaign as part of that ballot referendum. And what happened is a lot of people got to the polls and had no idea what the question was talking about. It was also ill-worded, so it did not pass. It failed narrowly, but many people just left it blank. So I've been trying to educate people about what it means and what it doesn't mean. Some of the naysayers have been running around saying that, we can't vote for this constitutional amendment because then the legislature might decide to do 90 days of early voting, 6 months of early voting. Right. That is not true. The legislature can't decide anything until we pass the constitutional amendment. And as someone who vice chairs our elections committee and is running for secretary of the state, I've never heard any Democrat in the legislature talk about 90 days, let alone 6 months. Denise Merrill, when asked a couple of years ago what she would recommend, she said 3 days. And that is the type of system we're looking at here in Connecticut. And I'm really committed to making sure we make sure towns have the resources to implement whatever the legislature does pass.
And oddly enough, 10 minutes ago, I just got a text that said Connecticut's Secretary of the State sample ballots are on for the November 8th election are now available for viewing online. That just came through. So
Good.
Somebody's being informative.
Yes, very good. Education.
And I do think, I think this also, I mean, my opinion, but I think this also helped. COVID also probably helped because people really, they didn't want to vote, be in a long line of people, that sort of thing. So I feel like COVID might have had some impact. But anyway, Sean, talk to us about some of the legislative accomplishments you are proud of that you participated in.
Well, I've been there for 8 years, and I've been really proud to pass, dozens of bills. Spent the first part of my time there working on healthcare. It's the single most important thing to me, and the reason why I ran for office in the first place. And passed a number of laws I'm proud of, like capping the cost of insulin and requiring every health plan in Connecticut to cover mental health and to cover the 10 essential benefits of the ACA. But I'll give you one that is really personal to me, which is that this year, as the chair of the Finance Committee, I was able to pass something I worked on for 2 years, which was to create a child tax credit here in Connecticut for families that have kids. I am a new dad. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-month-old, but that was not my motivation. My motivation was the way I grew up. My dad was a cop. My mom was a stay-at-home parent. And then, like a lot of families, my family's split up when I was 6. My dad moved back to New York, where he was from, and my mom raised me here in Guilford as a single parent. And she almost never had the resources that she needed to actually take care of me. She was literally working paycheck to paycheck. She started a small business of one, planning kids' birthday parties, and able to grow that business up substantially to be more successful. But it was hard. And I knew firsthand what a tax cut for her would have meant for her. And for me, in the last 2 years, I tried to focus on tax reform in the legislature. And usually when people talk about tax reform, that's code for cutting taxes for wealthy people and corporations. For me, it means cutting people that are working class, because they actually pay the most burden of all taxpayers in Connecticut on a disproportional basis compared to those at the top. So why should a cop or a small business owner pay more in taxes than somebody who's working on Wall Street? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know why anybody can defend that. And so I've tried to do that. And we finally got it done this year as part of the budget. We did pass the largest tax cut in the history of Connecticut. I was proud to work very closely with the governor on that. But in that budget was the child tax rebate. And because of it, the parents of 307,000 Connecticut kids got between $250 and $750 as a rebate to help them deal with the inflationary environment that we are in right now, which is very, very hard for families like the one that I grew up in. And a little bit of money coming back on taxes that they already paid last year, again, disproportionately to their neighbors that are more wealthy, I think is a big step in the right direction towards getting finally tax fairness in Connecticut and making the state more affordable. And as comptroller, what I will focus on every single day is just how can we lower costs and make it more affordable? Because if the state is affordable, people can get out there and start that business. They can get out there and have that baby that they wanted to have, they've been saving for. They can buy that house. They can invest in Connecticut. And when we do that, that's how I think we really, truly grow the state from the bottom up, not the top down.
I'm going to do parting shots, Ronni, unless you have any more questions.
No, I think I'm good.
All right. So, Stephanie, I'll start with you. One sentence. Why should we vote for you?
One sentence.
Tough on a politician, right? We're brutal over here.
I'm not a canned politician. I'm about the people, always have been about the people. I am about excellence in work, transparency in government. And I think people should vote for me because I will always tell it to them straight, but I'll also always listen.
You've mentioned that a few times in this conversation, this roundtable, that about transparency, and I couldn't agree more in terms of how much we need transparency these days more than ever. Sean, how about you?
I got a record of knowing how to get things done, and I will get them done to lower your costs.
Hey, you did it in truly one sentence too. So anyway, any questions for us? Any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
So there is one question in the chat, but it's not really related to what we've been talking about. We unfortunately have some really weird glitch in our Facebook Live that dates back to a time when we actually interviewed somebody from Ukraine. And every time we start Facebook Live, it says live interview with somebody in Ukraine. So somebody did ask a question about having a student from Ukraine who moved to town and the family could benefit from some support services. Is there anything local to Central Connecticut? If anyone knows anything, please let us know. I know some of the religious institutions have been setting up networks to help, and we'll try to respond to that offline. But in case you,
Well, I would
you
just
see that,
I would just say to Chris's question, IRIS is a great organization located in New Haven. They do an incredible amount of work for refugee resettlement and help in the state. And I bet you if you call IRIS, the folks there would be able to try to point you in the right direction of, is there anything available to people to help out?
right? Sounds good.
All right. Yeah. And we, by the way, this background glitch, we do fix it. So it's not permanent. We can fix it, but it's just something that's happened, and it's
living in the background there, and
it's on the platform.
yeah.
It's something we can't fix ahead of the show. We have to fix it after the show. So anyway, Stephanie Thomas, thank you so much. Sean Scanlon, thank you. It was wonderful having you. I think these conversations are important, and I'm really happy that we were able to get your word out statewide. Plenty of people will see this, and we wish you best of luck in the next 29 days. And I'm sure we'll see you on the road between now and then, but best of luck to both of you. Thank you for coming on.
So thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having us.
All right. And for Ronni Newton, I'm